I moved into the little rental outside Detroit 3 days before Thanksgiving, mostly because it was cheap and available immediately. I was 29, recently separated, and tired of sleeping on my sister's couch while pretending I had a plan. The house was narrow and old, with beige siding, a furnace that clicked before it started, and windows that rattled whenever the wind came hard off the street. I worked billing at a medical supply company in Dearborn, usually 8:30 to 5, and I liked coming home to somewhere that was finally mine. The neighborhood felt safe in a boring way. Retired couples shoveled their sidewalks before sunrise. Somebody's porch always smelled like cigarette smoke. Most people waved without stopping to talk. Graham lived next door. He introduced himself while I was dragging a bookshelf through the front door. Late 40s. Thinning brown hair, glasses, clean winter coat. Need a hand? I'm good, thanks. He nodded immediately. Sure, just thought I'd offer. That was Graham. Never pushy, never rude, almost overly careful about being polite. For the first couple weeks, I barely noticed him. Then the snow started. Whenever I came home, Graham seemed to be outside. If I arrived at 5:30, he was shoveling. If traffic kept me until 7, his house was dark. Once I left work sick and pulled into my driveway just after 4. As I shut off my engine, something made me look toward his house. Graham was standing at an upstairs window. He didn't wave. He looked directly at me and smiled, and something about that smile made me stay in my locked car longer than I needed to. I told myself I was being unfair. After my separation, my sister had accused me of expecting bad intentions from everybody. Maybe Graham worked from home. Maybe he liked watching the street. Maybe the smile had looked strange because we were 40 feet apart through 2 panes of winter glass. So I let it go. Then, during a heavy snowstorm the following Tuesday, I came home and found my porch completely dark. I always left the light on. It was one of those stupid little habits that became important only because I lived alone. Porch light on before work. Back door checked twice. Bedroom curtains closed before I changed clothes. I stood in the snow staring at the dead fixture, then used my phone flashlight to unlock the door. Inside, everything seemed normal. I flipped the porch switch twice. Nothing. The next morning, the light was working again. A few days later, I noticed my bedroom curtains were separated by maybe 3 inches. I knew I'd closed them. Then a kitchen chair was pulled away from the table. Then the bathroom cabinet was open. None of these things meant anything by themselves. That's what made me feel ridiculous. I'd stand there trying to reconstruct my morning. Did I leave that open? Did I move that chair? I started taking pictures before leaving for work. Curtains, kitchen, bathroom. That was when I realized I wasn't imagining it. The changes were small, but they were real. One night I stood in my hallway with my coat still on, staring at a kitchen chair that had moved nearly 2 feet. Through the wall, faint but unmistakable, I heard Graham's back door close. I didn't confront him. Part of me wanted to march next door and ask what the hell he was doing, but I had no proof he'd done anything. I also didn't want him knowing I was scared. Instead, I bought a $40 indoor camera from a big box store after work. It wasn't sophisticated. Motion detection, night vision, phone notifications. I placed it on a bookshelf facing the hallway where someone coming from the kitchen or back entrance would have to pass. For 6 nights, nothing happened. I actually started feeling embarrassed. Then, Thursday morning, I woke at 6:10 and saw a notification from 2:41 a.m. Motion detected. Still half asleep, I opened the clip. The hallway appeared in gray night vision, empty for several seconds. Then a shadow crossed the wall. Not a strange light, not my furnace turning on. A person. Someone moved from the direction of the back door, paused just outside my bedroom, then disappeared toward the kitchen. My hands went cold. I watched the clip 4 times before realizing the person had been inside while I was sleeping. The second recording came 90 seconds later. The figure returned the same way and left. I called the police from my bedroom with the door locked. 2 officers arrived while snow was still falling. They checked every window and both exterior doors. No forced entry, one said. Then he asked, "Landlord ever give anyone else a key?" I thought about it. My landlord, Dennis, had mentioned something during move-in. Graham used to help the previous tenants with snow. The officer stopped writing. "Your neighbor Graham?" I nodded. He looked toward the window, and for the first time, I noticed Graham's curtains were already open. Dennis answered on the third call. At first he sounded confused, then defensive. No. Graham shouldn't have a current key. Years ago I let him into the yard when tenants were away. That's it. Did he ever have access to the house? A long pause. Maybe an old spare, but I changed the locks. Maybe wasn't a word I wanted to hear. By afternoon, I was at my sister's house with 2 garbage bags of clothes and my laptop. I kept checking the camera, even though police had told me not to return alone. Then an officer called. Another neighbor had reported seeing Graham near the rear of her property late at night. Detectives had enough to start asking harder questions. Later, they searched his garage. What they found made the whole street feel different. Mail that wasn't his. Family photographs. Spare keys. Handwritten notes. A scarf. A child's baseball glove. Small things collected from different homes over years. Nothing of mine. For 10 seconds, I actually felt relieved. Then the detective said, "There is something connected to you. It was a notebook." Pages of dates and times. Monday, left 7:52. Wednesday, visitor, female, stayed 43 minutes. Friday, bedroom curtains open 10:18. There were notes about my work schedule, grocery trips, when I took out trash, even which nights I slept with the television on. Then the detective showed me one sentence written beside the date I bought the camera. "She knows I'm watching now." I read it twice. My sister touched my arm. I couldn't feel her hand, because suddenly I understood that the camera hadn't started this. It had only told Graham that I had finally noticed. I moved out that weekend. My brother-in-law and 2 friends came with a rented truck, and nobody let me go inside alone. Every room felt contaminated somehow. Not dirty, familiar in the wrong way. I kept looking at ordinary things. The coffee mug beside my sink, the chair near the window, the hallway outside my bedroom, and wondering where Graham had stood. He was arrested on several charges connected to property access and stolen belongings, though the investigation took months. What police eventually explained disturbed me more than the idea of a copied key. Behind several houses on our block were old utility and basement structures dating back decades. Renovations had sealed most of them, but not all. Graham had discovered an access route through an unused basement opening that connected into a narrow service space between properties. He hadn't forced my back door. He hadn't needed to. And according to investigators, stealing wasn't really the point. He collected information, schedules, relationships, habits, private details, things that gave him the feeling of knowing people without being known himself. For months after moving, I checked every lock before bed, sometimes twice, sometimes 5 times. I covered my windows earlier than necessary. If I saw somebody sitting in a parked car too long, my stomach tightened. Most of that faded. One thing never completely did. Whenever I pass a house at night and notice someone standing behind a window, I still remember Graham's face that afternoon. The direct stare, the small smile. Not because he had just started watching me, because he had realized I'd finally started watching him back. The first time I heard my own voice on Caleb's podcast, I wasn't wearing headphones at home. I was sitting 3 feet from him in a soundproofed garage, staring at a map of every place I went when I thought nobody was watching. 6 weeks earlier, he had just been the guy beside me at a bookstore in Portland. I'd gone alone to a true crime author event because my roommate had moved to Seattle, and I was still getting used to empty evenings. I edited promotional videos for a small outdoor company, mostly interviews and voiceovers, and I liked anything involving sound. Caleb was around 30, lean, clean-shaven, wearing a faded green jacket and carrying a notebook full of sticky tabs. He knew every case the author mentioned, but he wasn't obnoxious about it. Afterward, he asked what I did and said, "That explains why you kept flinching at the bad mic levels." I laughed because he was right. He told me about his podcast, Missing After Midnight, and admitted it only had a few thousand listeners. I need someone who can make it sound less like I record in a closet. We traded numbers. That night he sent me an episode and wrote, "No pressure. Tell me what sounds terrible." I listened in bed, smiling at how seriously he took it. I had no idea he was already studying me. For the first couple of weeks, working with Caleb was fun. He sent raw audio through a cloud folder. I cleaned up breaths and background hiss, and he paid me without making me chase him. We met at coffee shops, and once at a food cart pod near Hawthorne. He remembered small things, that I hated cinnamon in coffee, that I ran before work on Tuesdays, that our office lot flooded when it rained. I thought he was observant. That was his whole brand. Then I noticed the women. One episode covered a 23-year-old brunette who lived alone outside Eugene. Another was about a woman my age who disappeared after a late shift. Then came a runner last seen near a riverside trail. I joked, "You have a type." Caleb looked up. "A pattern." He explained that certain victim profiles repeated because routines made people predictable. That word stayed with me. After that, his questions felt different. What time did I run? Did my building have cameras? Was the garage gated? I started answering vaguely. He laughed when I called him creepy. Every good story needs obsession. That Friday, he invited me to hear the final cut of a new episode at his studio. I almost said no. Then he added, "You did half the work. You should hear it properly." Against my better judgment, I went. Caleb's studio was a converted garage behind a narrow rental house in southeast Portland. The house looked ordinary. Recycling bins by the porch, wet leaves stuck to the steps, a bicycle chained to the railing. The garage didn't. Black acoustic foam covered most of the walls. Heavy curtains were pinned over the windows, and weather stripping made the side door shut with a soft thump. He offered me sparkling water and started the episode. For 10 minutes, it sounded normal. His calm narration, low music, clips from public records. Then I heard a woman laugh. My laugh. I sat forward. A second clip played. My voice saying, "I usually leave around 6, unless we're slammed." That had come from a phone call with Caleb 2 weeks earlier. I looked at him. "Did you record me?" He didn't answer right away. He watched my face instead. Then his podcast voice came through the speakers. Her mistake was thinking attention and danger were different things. My stomach went cold. Beside his keyboard were printed maps. One showed my apartment block. One showed the route I ran near the river. Another had my workplace circled, including the rear lot employees used after dark. Caleb lowered the volume. "It's not what you think." I stayed seated. The deadbolt was behind him. I remember noticing stupid things before I noticed fear. Condensation sliding down my unopened can. The red light on the audio interface. Caleb's knee bouncing under the desk. If I accused him, I had no idea how he would react. So I looked at the map and said, "The twist is good." His knee stopped. I swallowed. "But the ending doesn't work." He frowned. "What part?" "No listener would believe she came here without leaving proof. Texts, location history, audio. People document everything now." That hit his ego exactly where I hoped. Caleb leaned back. "That's why it's fiction." "Then prove it," I said, trying to sound amused. "Record us arguing about it. Behind the scenes bonus. Make it messy." His face shifted from defensive to interested. The editing template I built weeks earlier auto-uploaded every session to our cloud folder. Caleb knew that, but I was betting he had forgotten. He armed the microphone. For 12 minutes, I challenged details and played dumb. He corrected me. He explained how he learned my schedule from social posts, recorded calls, and drove past my building for atmosphere. He kept calling it research. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. My boss. I have to take this. Caleb waved toward the door. I walked outside without my coat and kept going. I called my coworker Maya because I knew I'd start doubting myself alone. From a grocery store lot, shaking, I opened the cloud folder. It was there. Maya listened to 30 seconds and said, "Send it to me, now." By midnight, copies were with my manager, Caleb's sponsor, and his landlord. I messaged 3 women from earlier episodes and asked if Caleb had contacted them privately. 2 replied before sunrise. Both said he knew details they'd never shared publicly. I filed a police report the next morning. By then, his website was down. His social accounts were gone. The landlord checked the garage. Caleb had packed and left without notice. That was the part I couldn't make peace with. There was no arrest. No neat ending. Just a man who knew how much uncertainty he could leave behind. Months passed. I changed my running route, then stopped running alone. I moved when my lease ended. Eventually, I stopped checking every parked car. Almost. Sometimes I still search podcast directories and new true crime shows. I tell myself I'm making sure Caleb never started again. But whenever a calm male voice begins telling a story about a missing woman, I feel the same pressure in my chest. Because attention can feel flattering, right up until you realize it was surveillance all along. I started volunteering at the prison outside Halifax in January, mostly because my graduate advisor said community work would strengthen my application. I was 24, living alone in a basement apartment in Dartmouth, and still had that embarrassing confidence you get when your worst experiences have mostly been deadlines and bad relationships. Every Tuesday evening, I drove across wet, dark roads with a travel mug between my knees and parked beneath security lights that made the snow look blue. The literacy program met in a plain education room with bolted tables and shelves of donated paperbacks. Evelyn, the prison librarian, ran everything with quiet efficiency. She was tiny, silver-haired, and always smelled faintly of peppermint tea. Officer Mason usually escorted me from reception. "Stay where staff can see you," he told me my first night. And Pike, don't accept anything from him. Roland Pike sat near the back, mid-50s, thinning hair, reading glasses. Newspapers had called him manipulative, calculating, dangerous with women. In person, he barely looked at me. He spent most sessions copying passages from old novels in careful handwriting. Then one Tuesday, I collected his worksheet. My full name was written in the margin. He had scratched it out so violently the paper had torn, and when I looked up, Roland was watching Officer Mason instead of me. I reported the page immediately. Mason took it from me in the corridor, studied the torn margin, then gave a small nod. "Good," he said. Something about his tone bothered me. Not alarmed, almost satisfied. "What does that mean?" "It means you did what you were supposed to do. You told me." After that, he became more attentive. At first, I appreciated it. He waited outside the classroom when sessions ended, and sometimes brought me coffee from the staff room. "Long drive back?" 20 minutes if the bridge behaves." "You live alone?" I laughed. "Is that part of the security interview?" He smiled. "Just making sure somebody knows when to expect you." He asked whether I had a boyfriend, where I parked, whether my building had underground access. None of it sounded threatening because Mason framed everything as practical advice. Roland, meanwhile, said almost nothing. One night I was helping him sound out a paragraph when he asked, "He waiting for you again?" I looked toward the door. Mason stood outside, drinking coffee. "You should focus on the page," I said. Roland nodded. Before leaving, he slid a library card under his workbook. I nearly handed it back. Then I saw the writing on the reverse. "Ask Evelyn about the missing volunteers." I kept the card in my coat pocket until the session ended. Mason was waiting near the security door. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just tired." He offered me coffee. I told him I already had some. and walked toward the library before he could follow. Evelyn was shelving returns when I showed her the card. The change in her face was immediate. Her keys slipped from her hand and struck the floor with a sharp metallic sound. "Where did you get this?" "Roland." She glanced toward the hallway, then locked the library door. That frightened me more than anything Roland had ever done. Evelyn led me into a narrow archive room that smelled like dust and old cardboard. She opened a filing cabinet marked Volunteer Program. There were complaints inside. 3 women over 5 years. Different handwriting, same language. Officer Mason asks personal questions. Officer Mason waits after sessions. Officer Mason is becoming too protective. One woman wrote that he had appeared near her apartment after she stopped volunteering. My mouth went dry. What happened to them? 2 left the program. And the third? Evelyn hesitated. She disappeared while moving apartments. I stared at her. Then my phone vibrated inside my coat. A message from Mason. "You still in the building?" I didn't answer. My hands had started trembling badly enough that Evelyn took the phone from me and set it face down on the desk. "There's no proof he hurt anybody," she said quietly. "Understand that. Complaints aren't proof. Then why hasn't someone investigated?" They did. Each thing by itself looked small. Coffee, questions, waiting outside, offering rides. I thought about how many times I had thanked Mason for doing exactly those things. Then Evelyn said, "Roland remembers names." I looked at her. "He watches people. That's part of what makes him dangerous, but he also notices patterns." She pulled another file from the drawer. On several old literacy worksheets, Roland had written women's names in margins and crossed them out. Why? Evelyn closed the folder. Roland writes them down because Mason forgets which girls he has already chosen. The sentence made me feel physically sick. I didn't know whether chosen meant harassment, obsession, surveillance, or something worse. That uncertainty was almost unbearable. Outside the archive room, footsteps passed slowly down the library corridor. Keys jingled, then stopped. My phone vibrated again. This time Mason wrote, "I can drive you home if you're nervous." I had never told him I was nervous. Evelyn called a supervisor and stayed with me until another officer walked me to my car. Mason wasn't there. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. I drove home checking my mirrors so often I nearly missed my exit. When I reached my building, I sat inside the locked car and stared at every parked vehicle before running to the entrance. I resigned from the program the next morning. My advisor was confused. "You've only been there a few months." I know. I didn't explain much. Saying it aloud still made me feel foolish, because nothing had technically happened to me. 3 days later, Mason emailed my university account from a personal address. "Just checking that you're okay." I deleted it. A week passed. Then another message arrived. The subject line was, "You're safer with people who understand you." I forwarded both emails to the prison administration and police, changed my routines, and stayed with a friend for several nights. I never heard from Mason again. I also never went back to see Roland. For a long time I felt guilty about that. He was still a dangerous man. Evelyn had never asked me to forget that. But danger had been easier to understand when it sat across from me wearing prison clothes. What changed me was learning that sometimes the person warning you about the monster is only trying to control where you look. My name is Mark. I was 29, newly divorced, and working closing shifts at a Manhattan pharmacy near Lexington Avenue. The job was boring in a way I needed. Nina, our assistant manager, brought almonds in plastic bags and called her son every night at 9. Carla worked cosmetics and complained about her landlord. James, our pharmacy tech, hummed old rock songs while we counted drawers. I rented a narrow studio in Queens and usually got home after midnight, ate cereal over the sink, and fell asleep with the TV on. Diane started coming in that winter. She was maybe 50, neat, soft-spoken, and easy to like. She bought vitamins, shampoo, Cold medicine, nothing unusual. She remembered everyone's name, then our days off, who had kids, and who usually closed. We joked that she had a better memory than management. I stopped laughing the night she smiled at me over the register and asked why I had switched my Tuesday shift. I told myself Diane had probably overheard me talking to Nina. That explanation worked until Carla pulled me aside one Thursday and asked if Diane lived near 86th Street. Carla had seen her outside the subway station twice that week, standing beside a newspaper box with no shopping bags and no phone. "She didn't talk to me," Carla said. "She just stood there." A few days later, James admitted he had noticed Diane near his apartment in Brooklyn. He laughed while saying it, but kept rubbing the back of his neck. Nina finally asked Diane about it at the register. Diane smiled like we were teasing her. "It's New York," she said. "Everybody runs into everybody." It sounded reasonable enough that Nina apologized. Carla still changed trains and started walking 6 extra blocks home. 3 nights later, she came into work pale and quiet. Diane had been standing beside a coffee cart on Carla's new route, already there when Carla arrived. After that, I started paying attention. Diane never followed anyone directly. She did something smarter. She arrived first. I noticed her near the bus stop I used after closing, then inside a diner across from the pharmacy, where she could see our entrance. She always had a reason to be there if anyone asked. Coffee, a prescription, waiting for somebody. One rainy Tuesday, I stayed late because James had miscounted a drawer. Around 11:40, I looked through the front glass and saw Diane sitting in a gray sedan across the street. The engine was off. I stepped behind a display and watched. She flipped down the visor and stared into the mirror. Then she smiled. The smile vanished. She frowned, widened her eyes like she was frightened, relaxed her face, then tried the smile again. She repeated the sequence several times. Finally, she threw her head back and began laughing. The next morning she walked in normally, set vitamins on the counter, and asked me how my mother was doing. I had never told Diane anything about my mother beyond saying once that my family lived upstate. That was when curiosity turned into fear. I wrote down every time she came in and asked Carla and James to do the same. Within 2 weeks, the pattern was obvious. Diane visited near shift changes and asked harmless questions that gave her useful answers. "Your wife picking you up? Does Nina still close Fridays? You take the train all the way to Queens." None of it sounded threatening alone. Together, it felt like someone quietly drawing a map of our lives. We brought the notes to our manager. He worried about banning a customer without proof, but 3 complaints changed his mind. Diane listened without interrupting. I expected anger. Instead, she smiled. "You people really don't understand how much you reveal when you think nobody is paying attention." Then she placed her lotion on the counter and walked out. Through the window, I watched her stop across the street and look back at us. For a few weeks, every closing shift felt wrong. I checked reflections in dark windows. Carla called her boyfriend before leaving the subway. James parked closer to his building. Nothing happened. Diane never returned, and embarrassment crept in beside the fear. I wondered if we had turned an eccentric woman into something sinister because we had scared one another. Months passed. I found another job and stopped working nights. Then one Saturday afternoon, I passed a pharmacy downtown. Across the street sat a familiar gray sedan. Diane was inside, watching employees through the window. A young cashier came outside on break. Diane lifted a coffee cup, put on that warm little smile, and waited until the woman passed before writing in a notebook. I kept walking, then called the store and told the manager what had happened to us. I still don't know what Diane wanted. Maybe knowing us was the whole point. Ever since, I pay attention to what my routines reveal when I think nobody is watching. My name is Aaron, and I had moved into the little rental outside Columbus 6 months earlier, after separating from my fiancée. The house was nothing special. Gray siding, a narrow kitchen, a backyard barely big enough for a grill, but it was quiet, and quiet was what I wanted. My sister lived 20 minutes away, and my mom called every Sunday morning whether I answered or not. Most evenings I came home from the dental office where I worked, changed into sweatpants, made something easy, and sat on the back steps with coffee. Warren lived next door. He looked to be in his 60s, thin, careful, always in work pants, and the same brown jacket. He waved, but rarely talked. What I noticed first was his voice. He was constantly talking in his yard when nobody else was there. Sometimes he sounded annoyed. Sometimes he laughed. Once, I looked over and found him standing motionless beside his shed, facing my house. When he noticed me, he smiled and went back to pulling weeds. I remember thinking he was lonely. Then I saw what happened with the soccer ball. The boy across the street was maybe 8 or 9, small enough that the ball looked oversized against his sneakers. It rolled through a gap in Warren's fence one Saturday afternoon. I was watering plants when the kid slipped through the gate to get it. Warren came around the shed fast enough to make me look up. At first he only pointed toward the sidewalk and told the boy not to trespass. The kid apologized. Then Warren crouched until they were eye level, smiled, and whispered something I couldn't hear. The boy's face changed instantly. His mouth tightened, his eyes filled, and he backed away clutching the ball. When his mother hurried over, Warren stood up and became someone else. His shoulders relaxed, his voice softened. "I scared him," he said. "That's on me. I lost my patience." She accepted the apology and guided her son home. Warren even waved. That night, I kept replaying the switch in his face. A few days later, while carrying groceries inside, I glanced at his upstairs window. Warren was behind the curtain, watching a family walk their dog. The second the father looked toward his house, Warren disappeared. When they passed, his face slowly returned to the glass. That was the first time loneliness stopped feeling like a good explanation. After that, I started noticing things I probably would have ignored before. Warren knew when the school bus came. He knew which kids cut through the alley and which parents worked late. He never did anything obvious enough to confront. That was what bothered me. One rainy evening I was parked outside finishing a phone call when I saw a teenage girl walking from the bus stop with her hood up. Warren was 20 or 30 yards behind her. He wasn't hurrying, but he was moving in the same direction. The girl glanced back. Warren immediately turned toward his own mailbox and began sorting through envelopes, like he had been standing there all along. I told myself there could be an innocent explanation. I hated that I kept doing that. At our neighborhood barbecue 2 weeks later, Warren was almost charming. He joked with the dads about lawn care, complimented someone's potato salad, and helped carry folding chairs. Then I went behind my garage for extra ice and heard him before I saw him. He was standing alone near the fence, jaw tight, whispering the same words again and again. They don't listen until they're afraid. I froze with the cooler handle in my hand. A second later he noticed me. His face opened into that familiar pleasant smile. "Need help with that?" he asked. I said no, and carried the ice back with both hands, because they were shaking. From then on I watched how Warren acted around the neighborhood kids. He would step into arguments that had nothing to do with him, correct them sharply, scare them with some quiet warning, then soften his voice once they were upset. It was subtle enough that each incident looked harmless by itself. Together, it felt deliberate. The real break came when a girl named Lucy told her mother that Warren had followed her home from school. Lucy was 11. Her mother, Dana, confronted him on the sidewalk that evening. Warren looked genuinely confused. "I haven't seen Lucy today," he said. Dana almost apologized, until another parent mentioned his son had said something similar weeks earlier. That night, 6 of us sat around Dana's kitchen table, comparing what the kids had told us. Different days, different streets, same pattern. Warren appeared nearby, spoke to them when adults weren't around, frightened them, then acted warm later. Nobody had proof of a crime, But nobody laughed anymore. Dana called the landlord. Another parent made a police report so there would be a record. 2 weeks later, Warren's landlord told us his lease would not be renewed. Warren never confronted anyone. He only started packing. The last week was strangely quiet. Warren stopped sitting outside. His curtains stayed closed, and a rented trailer appeared in his driveway. I felt relief, but also guilt, because part of me kept wondering whether we had misunderstood a lonely, troubled man. On his final evening, I was washing dishes when I noticed light moving through his living room window. Most of the furniture was gone. Warren stood in the middle of the room facing an old wooden chair he hadn't packed yet. He was talking to it in a low, irritated voice, pausing between sentences as if someone were answering. I couldn't make out the words through the rain until he moved closer to the open window. "No," he said. "They noticed because you got careless." Then silence. I stepped back from my sink, suddenly embarrassed to be watching him after everything. Warren's head turned toward my house. Slowly, he looked directly at my kitchen window and smiled. "She's still watching me," he said quietly. I closed the blinds and locked the back door. By morning he was gone. I never learned what he meant, or whether the chair meant anything beyond a man talking to himself. What I learned was simpler. Dangerous behavior rarely arrives looking dangerous. Sometimes it arrives smiling, helpful, and completely reasonable. I signed up for the evening photography course because my life had started to feel painfully repetitive. I was 31, working in payroll for a property company near Holborn, taking the same train, eating the same supermarket dinners, and calling my mum every Sunday evening so she wouldn't worry that London had swallowed me whole. The class met twice a week in an old college building near Camden. There were 10 of us, mostly tired office workers trying to do something creative after work. Our teacher, Mr. Hales, was in his 40s, soft-spoken, clever, and patient in a way that made people relax around him. He remembered what cameras we used, what photographs we liked, even little things from casual conversations. At first, I liked that. He told me I had an eye for loneliness, which sounded flattering coming from him. Then one night, while looking over a photo I had taken of wet pavement, he said, "You get that same light on your street near Kentish Town." I looked at him. "How do you know where I live?" He smiled and said I must have mentioned it. I laughed, but walking home that night, I knew I hadn't. I tried to convince myself I had forgotten telling him. That was easier than admitting the comment bothered me. Mr. Hales remained completely normal. He corrected James's exposure settings, teased Priya about always photographing coffee cups, and brought biscuits when someone complained about missing dinner. With me, though, the attention slowly increased. He praised ordinary pictures, like they were exceptional. He remembered that I lived alone, that my sister was in Manchester, that I hated crowded trains. Once, he asked whether I still walked from the station instead of taking the bus. I gave him a vague answer and started leaving class with Priya. She thought I was overthinking it. "He's just observant," she said. Maybe she was right. Then a wet Thursday came when everyone rushed out early because the rain was getting worse. I stayed behind to finish developing a set of black and white prints. Mr. Hales was in his office and told me not to hurry. The building became strangely quiet after 9. I could hear water ticking against the high windows and the ventilation humming over the dark-room sinks. When I finally stepped into the classroom, he was waiting beside the door. Then I heard the lock click. I actually smiled when he locked it, because my brain wanted the moment to be ordinary. "Are we not supposed to leave that open?" I asked. Mr. Hales didn't answer immediately. He leaned against a desk and studied me with the same expression he used when critiquing photographs. "You have a lonely face," he said. I gave this little nervous laugh and reached for my coat. "That's encouraging." He didn't smile. Lonely people are easier to photograph honestly. They don't notice who's looking. Something cold moved through my stomach. I asked him to unlock the door. Instead, He walked to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, and removed a brown envelope. He spread several prints across the surface. Everyone showed me. Me leaving the college, me at the underground entrance, me carrying groceries, me standing beneath an awning while checking my phone. Different clothes, different nights. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I forced myself not to panic and asked, "Why did you take these?" While he started explaining something about candid photography, I slipped my hand inside my coat pocket, unlocked my phone by feel, and dialed emergency services. I left the call connected and kept my coat hanging over my arm, praying the operator could hear us. Mr. Hales spoke calmly, which somehow frightened me more than shouting would have. He said people performed when they knew they were being photographed. He said he wanted the person underneath. I nodded, as if I understood because I needed him talking. "So you followed me?" I asked. He corrected me immediately. Observed, "There's a difference." Then he stepped around the desk. I moved backward until my hip touched the darkroom counter. He told me not to make the situation ugly. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my coat. There was a plastic developing tray beside me, with used liquid waiting to be disposed of. When he came another step closer, I shoved the tray off the counter. It hit the floor between us with a splash and a crack. He jumped back instinctively. I ran. The classroom door had a thumb-turn lock on our side. I twisted it, yanked the door open, and sprinted into the corridor screaming for help. I hammered on doors until one finally opened. A cleaner stared at me, terrified. Behind me, I heard Mr. Hales saying my name. The cleaner pulled me into a staff room and locked the door while I stayed on the phone with police. Officers arrived within minutes. I remember sitting beneath fluorescent lights with my wet coat around my shoulders, staring at my shoes because looking at anyone felt impossible. Mr. Hales was taken aside, and later the police searched his office. They found folders containing photographs and notes about several female students, including women from earlier courses. The folders were labeled with descriptions like isolated, anxious, attention-seeking, and compliant. Mine said lives alone. That was the detail that finally made me cry. The college later described everything as a serious safeguarding matter. I understood the language, but it felt too clean for what had happened. I gave statements, left the course, and stopped taking photographs for months. Eventually, I started again, but never in the same careless way. I still love evening streets, reflections in rain, strangers under station lights. I just notice who is behind me now, and whenever someone remembers a detail I'm certain I never shared, I don't laugh it off anymore. I was 29 then, a project coordinator at a marketing firm downtown, the kind of job where everyone praised work-life balance until a client presentation was due. I lived in Ballard with my roommate, Jess, who worked early shifts at a veterinary clinic and left sticky notes on the fridge reminding me to eat real dinners. Most nights I was home by 7. That Tuesday, our biggest retail client changed half the deck at 5:30, and I volunteered to stay because I knew the numbers best. By 9, the office had emptied. I ordered noodles, kicked off my heels under my desk, and texted Jess that I'd probably be home around 11. Outside, Seattle rain streaked the windows and turned the streets below into blurred ribbons of light. At 10:45, I heard footsteps behind me. Mark from analytics appeared carrying 2 coffees. I barely knew him beyond meetings and hallway small talk. "Figured you'd need one," he said. It seemed thoughtful, so I smiled and took it. Then he leaned against the desk beside mine and asked, almost casually, "Do you ever miss Santa Fe?" I hadn't talked about Santa Fe at work, not once. I had been to Santa Fe 4 years earlier with an ex-boyfriend. I posted a few pictures and deleted them after we broke up. When I stared at Mark, he smiled like he understood the question behind my silence. "You had that photo by the blue door," he said. "Great light." I told myself he must have scrolled through my profile years ago when we connected for an office campaign. Weird. Yes, dangerous? I wasn't ready to call it that. Mark was easy to underestimate. Mid-30s, soft-spoken, always in clean button-downs with the sleeves rolled exactly twice. He brought homemade lunches and remembered birthdays, but he kept talking as if we were old friends. He mentioned a band I liked in college, a restaurant I had checked into once, even a post I had liked years earlier. Each detail had an explanation. Together they made my shoulders tighten. I glanced at the clock and said I should finish up. Mark looked toward the elevators. No rush. They're acting up anyway. A second later, the Wi-Fi dropped. He laughed softly. Guess you're trapped with the most interesting person here. That was when the room stopped feeling like my office. I slid my phone beneath the edge of my desk and texted Jess. Still here. Guy from work being weird. Call me. The message stayed unsent. No service. I stood and reached for my coat. I'll take the stairs. Mark's expression barely changed. That door locks after hours. I knew that was wrong. Our safety training specifically said the stairwell stayed accessible from the office side. I looked toward the glowing exit sign and noticed his black laptop bag on the carpet directly in front of the stairwell door. I had not seen him put it there. My heart started pounding, but I still hesitated. I didn't want to accuse someone who might only be socially awkward. I didn't want to turn an uncomfortable conversation into a scene. Oh wait, I said, forcing a laugh. My charger's in the conference room. He straightened. I'll come with you. No, it's fine. For 1 second his smile disappeared. Then he said, You don't have to be nervous around me, Claire. I had never told him I was nervous. I walked toward the conference room without running. The second I got inside, I shut the glass door and locked it. His reflection appeared behind me before I heard the first knock. The conference room had one glass wall facing the office and windows overlooking the wet city. No second exit. I backed away from the door while Mark stood outside with one hand in his pocket. He didn't bang. He knocked gently. Claire, come on. This is embarrassing. I spotted the landline beside the presentation screen and grabbed it. Building security answered, and I gave our floor, company name, and said a coworker was preventing me from leaving. Mark watched me through the glass. His face changed when he realized who I was calling. You're overreacting, he said. I just wanted one real conversation, without everyone around. I stayed silent. Then he added, You act like I'm a stranger. I know you better than half the people you call friends. That frightened me, more than shouting would have. Security told me officers were coming up. A moment later, I heard the elevator machinery start beyond the wall. Mark turned toward the sound and walked quickly toward the stairwell. When security arrived with 2 police officers, one guard tried the stairwell door and frowned. A conference chair had been wedged beneath the handle from inside our office. I didn't sleep that night. Jess sat with me on our living room floor until sunrise, while rain tapped the windows and my tea went cold. I kept replaying the coffee, the old photos, the bag by the door. Police questioned Mark downstairs. He had not touched me or made an explicit threat, but the blocked stairwell changed everything. HR put him on leave the next morning. Within a week, he was fired after the company reviewed badge records and spoke with 2 women who said he had made them uncomfortable before. I transferred teams anyway. For months, I checked dark office windows before entering empty rooms. I stopped staying late alone, and every time an elevator hesitated between floors, my stomach tightened. Eventually, the fear became quieter. It never vanished. What happened to me wasn't dramatic enough for headlines. There was no chase, no weapon, no physical injury, just a blocked exit and a man who had confused surveillance with intimacy. That was enough to change me. I learned that danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it remembers your old photographs, brings you coffee, and waits patiently for everyone else to leave. I moved into the basement suite in Vancouver in October because it was the first place I could afford without taking a second job. I was 28, working billing at a dental supply company, and after a bad breakup, I wanted somewhere quiet, where nobody expected anything from me. The suite was small but clean, 1 bedroom, low ceilings, beige carpet, and a narrow kitchen window level with the backyard grass. My mom hated the windows. She said they made the place feel buried. I laughed and told her cheap rent had a personality. The landlord, Daniel Mercer, lived upstairs with his wife, though I rarely saw her. Daniel was in his early 50s, polite in a restless way, always rubbing his palms together while he talked. The first week he came down twice, once to check the water pressure, once because he thought a vent sounded loose. Nothing was wrong either time. I told myself he was protective of the property. By November, his visits had become a pattern. Pipes, furnace, water heater, smoke detector. He always had a reason, and always smiled when I hesitated. Then one evening he looked past me into my bedroom and said, "You moved the bed." I had moved it 3 days earlier, 6 inches away from the wall because the baseboard heater made the room too warm. Daniel had not been inside since then, at least, not while I was home. When I asked how he knew, he blinked and said he remembered seeing the headboard through the doorway during his last inspection. It was possible. That was what made every strange moment with him so easy to dismiss. There was an explanation waiting. I started locking the deadbolt even when I was home. My coworker Maya teased me for being paranoid, then stopped laughing when I told her Daniel had begun texting instead of emailing. "Need to check furnace tonight. Water pressure seems off upstairs." Once, at 9:40 p.m., he asked whether I was alone because he needed access to the utility closet. I replied that he could come the next afternoon. He wrote back, "No problem," with a thumbs up. For a week, nothing happened. I relaxed enough to feel embarrassed. Then, on a rainy Thursday, I came home and noticed muddy half-moon prints on the vinyl floor near my bedroom. My shoes were dry. Daniel claimed he had not entered. That night, I wedged a chair under the door handle before I went to sleep. The knocking woke me at 12:20 a.m. 3 hard taps, then Daniel's voice. "Hey, sorry. I think we may have a gas leak. I need to get in there." I sat up so fast my blanket slid to the floor. Rain whispered against the little window above my dresser. For a second, the word gas overrode everything else. I reached for the door before something stopped me. There was no smell. My carbon monoxide alarm showed a steady green light. No beeping, no headache, no dizziness, nothing. "Where's the leak?" I asked through the door. "Could be near your water heater. Open up and I'll check." His voice sounded impatient now. I searched the emergency number for the gas utility and called from my bed. The dispatcher asked for my address, checked their system, and told me there was no reported emergency or technician headed to the property. She advised me not to investigate a suspected leak myself and said she could send someone. I raised my voice so Daniel could hear. "The gas company is coming." Silence. Then he said, "This is my house. I don't need permission to enter." A second later, metal scraped inside my lock. He had a key. I shoved the dresser toward the door with both hands. One corner caught in the carpet, and I nearly fell, but I forced it across until the wood pressed against the handle. Daniel twisted the lock again outside. "Are you serious?" he snapped. "Move that." I called 911 and whispered my address. The dispatcher kept me talking while I sat against the dresser, my knees knocking together. Daniel stopped trying the door, but I heard him moving upstairs. That was when I noticed the red light. It blinked once above my bed, so small I almost thought I imagined it. The smoke detector had been there since move-in. Daniel had tested it twice. I stood on the mattress and looked closer. Behind a vent slot was a dark glass circle no bigger than a pea. My stomach dropped. I told the dispatcher I thought there was a camera in my bedroom. Saying it aloud made the room feel contaminated. I looked toward the bathroom vent and remembered Daniel insisting on checking that one too. Police arrived minutes later. I heard boots on the stairs, then Daniel protesting upstairs. An officer entered my room, climbed onto the bed, and stared at the detector. Then he quietly said, "Don't touch anything." They found one camera inside the smoke detector and another hidden behind the bathroom vent. I sat wrapped in a blanket on my bed, while officers photographed everything I had treated as home for 3 months. Upstairs, they seized Daniel's laptop. An officer later told me there were saved recordings from inside my suite. I did not ask how many. I still have not. Daniel was arrested that night. His wife stood in the kitchen crying and saying she had no idea. I believed her because she could not make herself look toward the basement stairs. 2 officers waited while I packed my passport, medication, work laptop, and a duffel bag. Maya answered on the second ring and told me to come straight over. I left at 3:14 in the morning without taking my furniture or the framed photograph beside my bed. A tenant's attorney helped me end the lease. A month later, I moved into a building with electronic entry and written notice for maintenance. I check smoke detectors when I stay somewhere new. What changed most was not that I became afraid of strangers. I stopped confusing access with permission. A key can open a door, but that does not mean the person holding it belongs on the other side. I had known Aaron since college in Calgary. We were never best friends, but we stayed in touch through birthdays, hockey nights, and a group chat that only woke up when someone suggested a trip. I was 31, working inventory for an electrical supplier, and living alone after a breakup that left me more tired than heartbroken. When Aaron invited me to his family cabin with 3 other guys from school, it sounded easy. 2 nights, cards, bad food, maybe too much coffee. My mom asked for the address because she always did. I sent her a screenshot of the route, joked that I was too old to be checked on, then drove north after work. I arrived just after 7. Snowmelt had softened the dirt road, and the air smelled like wet pine and smoke. Aaron came down the steps smiling. "Looks like it's just us," he said. Everyone bailed. My stomach tightened, but I forced a laugh and carried my bag inside that night. The cabin was ordinary enough to make me feel foolish for being uneasy. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, faded plaid furniture, fishing photos on the walls. Aaron made coffee even though it was late, and talked about our old campus apartment, people we had not mentioned in years, professors we hated, and the night somebody broke a laundry room window with a hockey stick. He was relaxed, and after an hour I started telling myself I had misread the situation. Dinner was frozen burgers cooked in a skillet because the grill would not light. Aaron complained about work, about a manager who kept taking credit for everything, then laughed and changed the subject. He had always been intense when he felt ignored, but back then it seemed harmless. Around 10, I checked my phone. No signal. "Nothing out here," Aaron said. Kind of the point. I asked where the nearest store was. 20 minutes by car. The closest neighbor, he said, was a few minutes through the trees. Then he asked, "Your parents still track your phone?" I stared at him. "What? Find my friends or whatever?" I laughed awkwardly. "No." He nodded. "So nobody really knows exactly where you are." That was the first question I could not explain away. After that, the evening changed without anything obvious happening. Aaron kept talking, but I started hearing the pauses between his words. He asked whether my mom had the exact cabin address or just the highway route. He wanted to know if I had told anyone at work where I was spending the weekend. Every question came wrapped in some harmless explanation. "Just wondering in case something happens out here," he said. I told him my family knew where I was, which was partly true, and watched his face. He only smiled. By 11:30 I was exhausted. I decided I would sleep a few hours and leave early. My keys had been on the kitchen counter beside my wallet. When I reached for them, they were gone. I checked my coat, my bag, under the table. Aaron leaned against the counter. "Lose something?" "My keys. Maybe you dropped them outside." I remembered setting them down. I put on my boots and stepped into the cold. The yard was black except for the porch light. Behind the shed, something reflected faintly. My car was there. I had parked in front of the cabin. Now it sat half hidden behind the shed, with a gray tarp pulled over the windshield. For a few seconds I could not breathe. Then the cabin door opened behind me. I turned and saw Aaron on the porch. "What are you doing?" I asked. He glanced toward the car and laughed softly. I moved it. The ground up front gets soft overnight. There had been no reason not to tell me. I said I was tired and needed the bathroom. My voice sounded almost normal. Inside, I locked the bathroom door and checked my phone again. Still no signal. The room had one narrow window above the tub, maybe 18 inches high. Aaron knocked. "You okay?" "Yeah." A pause. "Don't make this weird." He said it lightly, almost amused, and that scared me more than shouting would have. I pushed the window up. Cold air poured in. I climbed onto the tub, squeezed through sideways, and dropped into wet mud hard enough to scrape my palm. Behind me, the bathroom handle rattled once. I ran. Branches slapped my face as I moved toward a yellow light I had noticed through the trees earlier. My lungs burned, and every few seconds, I thought I heard movement behind me. The light became a farmhouse porch. I hammered on the door until an older man opened it wearing slippers and holding a cordless phone. I could barely speak. "There's someone at the cabin. Please call the police." The couple, Dawn and Marlene, brought me inside and locked the door while Dawn called the RCMP. Marlene wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and kept asking if I was hurt. I remember staring at mud drying on their kitchen floor and apologizing because my brain had grabbed onto the smallest normal thing it could find. Officers arrived about half an hour later. I rode back with them. Aaron was still at the cabin. He acted confused, then irritated, insisting I had panicked over nothing. My keys were found in the pocket of his jacket hanging beside the stove. That alone made my knees weaken. The notebook came later. An officer asked whether I recognized several names inside. I knew 2 from college. Beside the names were dates, routes, and short notes about possible accidents: a fall near water, a vehicle problem on an isolated road, someone drinking too much before driving. My name appeared near the back. I never learned how far Aaron intended to go that night. I only knew I had stopped giving him the chance. I drove home the next afternoon with my mother on speakerphone most of the way. I still travel. I still visit friends. But now someone always knows where I am. Trust used to mean not asking questions. Now I know better. My nephew Caleb started spending weekends with me after my sister picked up Saturday shifts at St. Joseph's. I'm 34, single, and I work from home doing insurance claims, so becoming the Saturday uncle wasn't much of a sacrifice. Honestly, I liked it. Caleb brought noise into my apartment: Cheerios under the couch, fingerprints on the television, toy cars lined across the bathroom floor. He also forced me outside. The playground sat behind my building, past a row of maples and a cracked basketball court. Most Saturdays followed the same routine: coffee for me, chocolate milk for Caleb, then 2 hours at the park before lunch. That's where I first noticed Arthur. He looked around 60, thin gray hair, wire-frame glasses, tan windbreaker no matter the temperature. He always occupied the same green bench facing the swings. Usually he had a newspaper. Usually he wasn't reading it. He'd lower the pages whenever children argued, especially when one child refused another. One morning a little girl shouted, "No, I don't want to." Arthur's jaw tightened. Not anger exactly, more like she'd disappointed him. Then he caught me looking and raised his newspaper. I remember thinking I'd probably imagined it. The following Saturday, Arthur was there before us, and when Caleb ran toward the swings, Arthur folded his newspaper before Caleb had even reached them. For the next few weekends, nothing happened that I could point to. That was what made me feel ridiculous. Arthur didn't photograph anyone. He didn't offer candy. He didn't follow children into the restroom. Whenever another adult passed, He'd give a polite nod and go back to his paper. If somebody had asked me what he'd actually done, my answer would have sounded stupid. He watches. Everybody watches at playgrounds. Still, I began positioning myself differently. I stopped sitting with my back toward the bench. I kept Caleb where I could see him. Caleb never mentioned Arthur until the soccer ball rolled away from him one Saturday afternoon. It bumped Arthur's shoe. Arthur trapped it beneath his loafer and looked at Caleb. "Come get it." Caleb slowed. Arthur picked up the ball but didn't hand it over immediately. "You should learn to listen the first time," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It sounded almost grandfatherly. Caleb looked at me. Something in his face changed. I walked over and said, "I'll take it." Arthur smiled. "Just teaching him manners. He's 5. Best age to learn." I took the ball. Caleb grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go until we reached the apartment. That evening he asked me something while I was making grilled cheese. "Uncle Mark?" "Yeah?" "Why did that man know I don't listen?" I turned from the stove. "What do you mean?" Caleb stared at the floor. He said, "Mommy says it too." Arthur had never met my sister. I questioned Caleb carefully, because kids can connect things adults never meant to connect. Arthur hadn't mentioned my sister. Caleb admitted that after a minute, he'd heard "listen" the first time at home and assumed Arthur somehow knew. That should have reassured me. It didn't. The next weekend I spoke to Dana, a mother I recognized from the playground. Her daughter Sophie was 7 and seemed to know everybody. I nodded toward Arthur. "You know that guy?" Dana barely looked. "Arthur? He's been coming here forever. He have grandchildren?" "Not that I know of." She said it casually, then watched him for a few seconds. "He's weird though." That word opened something. Dana told me Arthur sometimes talked to kids when parents were close enough that it looked harmless. Little questions. Who cheated at tag? Who didn't share? Who was being mean today? Then Sophie came running over. "We don't play behind the climbing wall anymore." Dana frowned. "Why?" Sophie shrugged. "That's where bad kid goes." "What bad kid?" She pointed toward Arthur. "He picks one." My stomach went cold. That afternoon I watched more carefully. A boy named Mason approached the climbing wall. 2 other kids immediately moved away from him. Mason looked confused. "What?" one whispered. "Arthur said you're bad today." Mason's face collapsed. Across the park, Arthur was pretending to read. But I could see his mouth moving. He was smiling. Later, after everyone left, I stayed near the basketball court while Caleb finished his juice. Arthur was still on the bench. The newspaper was gone. He was talking quietly to himself, first in a child's voice, then in an adult's. Then he said, very clearly, "No, that's not what happened. Try again." After that, parents started comparing stories. Nothing Arthur did sounded serious by itself, which seemed to be exactly how he'd gotten away with it. He'd tell one child, "I wouldn't trust him today." Another, "Good children know when somebody is lying." Another, "If your friend cared about you, she'd listen." Never threats, never touching, just little seeds. Within weeks, kids who'd played together for years were asking each other who Arthur liked, who he'd called bad, who was in trouble. Caleb stopped going near the bench completely. Then one Saturday, Mason's mother finally confronted Arthur. I was close enough to hear. "Stop talking to my son." Arthur lowered his paper. "I beg your pardon?" "You've been telling these kids things about each other. I'm teaching them consequences." "You're confusing them." His face changed. Not guilt, injury, like she'd insulted something decent in him. "Children need structure. You're a stranger. I've been coming here longer than you have. That doesn't make you family." Arthur stood. He wasn't physically imposing. That almost made it worse. He looked around at all of us. "I have never touched a child." Nobody answered. Arthur's voice became sharper. "Not once." And that was when I understood something. Nobody had accused him of touching anyone. He had brought it up himself. Arthur left 10 minutes later. Before walking away, he stopped beside Caleb. I stepped between them. Arthur looked past me at my nephew and said softly, "Ask him why he's afraid of me." Then he walked away. That night Caleb woke screaming, and when I reached his room, he was standing at the window, staring down toward the empty playground. Arthur stopped coming after the confrontation. At first, I thought that would fix everything. It didn't. For several weeks, the children still carried his rules around with them. Sophie refused to play with Mason because he had been bad twice. Caleb asked whether telling on somebody made you good. Another boy cried because nobody could remember whether Arthur had forgiven him. That disturbed me more than Arthur himself. He had left, but the fear remained. A shadow without anything supernatural behind it. Just memory. Parents started correcting it slowly. We stopped using Arthur's language. No good kids. No bad kids. Just good choices and bad choices. We made them talk directly to each other instead of reporting rumors. When arguments happened, we stayed nearby, but let them repair things. Months passed. The playground became ordinary again. One Saturday in spring, Caleb kicked a ball toward Arthur's old bench. He froze. I could see the old fear return before he looked at me. "It's okay," I said. He walked over by himself. The bench was empty. Caleb picked up the ball, stared at the worn wooden slats, then came running back. I felt relief, but not victory. Arthur had taught me something I wish I hadn't needed to learn. I used to think dangerous people announce themselves through violence. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they study insecurity. Sometimes they learn which sentence makes a child doubt a friend, which look makes them question themselves, which tiny fear can be planted without leaving evidence. Arthur never attacked anyone at that playground. He never needed to. For a while, he discovered something that frightened me far more. He discovered how little pressure it takes to make people afraid of each other, and how long that fear can remain after the person who planted it is gone. My sister Claire had always been the steady one in our family. I was the one who forgot birthdays and changed jobs too often. Claire remembered our mother's prescriptions, sent Christmas cards before December, and kept a little notebook in her purse where she wrote everything down. So when she broke down at 38, none of us understood it. It happened slowly after her divorce. First she stopped sleeping, then she started calling me at 2 in the morning because she was convinced she had sent the wrong email at work and would be fired. By March, she was barely eating. One morning her neighbor found her sitting in the hallway of her apartment in Laval, wearing one shoe, unable to explain where she was going. The psychiatric facility was 40 minutes outside Montreal, surrounded by pine trees and expensive homes. From the parking lot it looked more like a private resort than a hospital. Glass walls, warm lamps, a stone path around a frozen pond. Claire hated it. During my visits, she usually spoke quietly and apologized for everything. "I'm making this difficult for you. You're sick," I told her. "You're not doing anything to me." That afternoon she kept looking past my shoulder. A man in pale blue scrubs was stacking plastic cups near the nurse's station. "That's Martin," she whispered. I glanced over. He looked ordinary, mid-40s maybe, clean-shaven, calm face. "What about him?" Claire lowered her voice. "He studies us." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. "Studies you how?" She stared at him. "He watches who gets visitors." Then Martin looked directly at us and smiled. I asked one of the nurses about Martin before I left. Her name was Isabel. She had kind eyes and the exhausted posture of somebody 12 hours into a shift. When I mentioned Claire's concern, she gave me the careful smile medical people use when they're trying not to embarrass a family member. "Your sister is very hypervigilant right now. I understand that. She notices patterns that may feel threatening. Is Martin okay with patients?" Isabel hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "He's worked here for years." That wasn't what I asked, but I let it go. I had booked a room at a roadside motel because visiting hours ended at 8, and driving back to Ottawa through freezing rain made no sense. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. The heater rattled every few minutes, like something trapped inside it. Before I left the hospital, Claire hugged me longer than usual. "Please don't go tonight. I'm 10 minutes away." "No, I mean don't leave me here." Her voice cracked. I looked toward the desk. Martin was helping an older patient button a cardigan. He was gentle, almost fatherly. "Claire, you're safe." She pulled back. "No, you don't understand. He knows who has people." "What does that mean?" "People like me, you come. Mom calls, you ask questions." She swallowed. "Some people, nobody comes." Then she slipped something into my palm, a folded paper napkin. 3 names were written on it in her shaky handwriting. "Look them up," she said. That night, sitting on the motel bed with my laptop open, I searched the first name. The obituary appeared before I finished typing. The first man, Daniel Beaulieu, had died by suicide 6 months after leaving the facility. The second name belonged to a woman named Renee Harcourt. I found a memorial post written by her sister. Different city, same ending. 4 months after discharge, I told myself that psychiatric hospitals treated suicidal people. Of course, former patients sometimes died. It was tragic, but it wasn't proof of anything. Then I searched the third name, Evan Marois. No obituary. His Facebook page simply stopped. The last public post was 18 months old, a photograph of a dog sleeping beside a radiator. Before that, there were dozens of posts. Hockey complaints, bad jokes, birthday messages, then nothing. I barely slept. At breakfast, I called Claire. No answer. I called the unit and was told she was in morning group. When I returned that evening, Martin was sitting behind the desk. He looked up immediately. "Claire's brother." Not a question. I forced a smile. "That obvious. She talks about you." His tone was friendly. I signed the visitor sheet. Martin watched my pen move. "She creates stories when she feels powerless," he said. I stopped writing. "What kind of stories?" His smile stayed exactly the same. "Stories where people are watching her, targeting her. It helps her feel important." Something about the sentence bothered me. Not what he said, how smoothly he said it, like he'd said it before. Claire was waiting in the lounge. She looked exhausted. When Martin walked past the doorway, she stopped speaking completely. Later, in the parking lot, I sat in my car and searched Daniel Beaulieu's family. His mother had a Facebook account. I stared at the message box for 5 minutes before typing. "My sister was a patient at the same facility as your son. Did he ever mention an orderly named Martin?" The reply came 9 minutes later. "Yes, call me." Daniel's mother, Louise, sounded cautious at first. Then I mentioned Martin's name again. Her breathing changed. "My son called him the night man." I asked why. "He volunteered for late rounds, sat with patients when nurses were busy." Daniel thought he was helping at first. "What changed?" Louise went quiet. "He started asking things." "What things?" "Who would notice if Daniel left? Whether I checked on him every day, whether his father still spoke to him." I gripped the phone harder. Louise said Daniel had complained twice, but his chart described the concerns as persecutory thinking. That phrase stayed with me. Persecutory thinking. A medical explanation that could also erase a warning. Louise connected me with Renee's sister. Her story was different in details but identical in shape. Martin had been unusually attentive. Private conversations, questions about family, questions about who visited. Neither family had proof of abuse, only notes, memories, and dead relatives. I expected anger. What I felt was guilt. Claire had told me plainly, and I had treated her fear like another symptom. The next day I contacted a Montreal journalist, whose name appeared in an article about patient mistreatment at private facilities. I expected no response. She called that afternoon. Her name was Nadia. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me something I hadn't considered. "Do you have your sister's records?" "No." "Get them." "Why?" "Because if she complained, somebody wrote something down." I requested the records that evening. The facility told me Claire would need to sign consent. When I brought her the form, she read it twice. Then she looked at me and whispered, "You finally believe me." I couldn't answer right away, and the look on her face when I hesitated hurt worse than anything Martin had done yet. Claire signed the release. Her records arrived 4 days later. Most of it was ordinary clinical language: sleep, medication, appetite, mood. Then Nadia found the pattern. 3 separate entries described Claire expressing unfounded concerns regarding overnight staff. Martin's name never appeared. Neither did the fact that Claire had identified one specific orderly. Louise's attorney obtained Daniel's records. Renee's family did the same. The wording was almost identical. Within 2 weeks, there were 5 families talking to each other, 1 lawyer coordinating documents, and Nadia asking questions the facility suddenly seemed very interested in answering privately. There were no police cars, no dramatic arrest. Martin simply disappeared from the unit schedule. The facility sent families an email announcing an internal review of staff-patient boundary procedures. Claire laughed when I read it to her, not because it was funny. "That means they're scared," she said. She transferred to a public hospital closer to Montreal. The building was uglier, the food was worse, but she started sleeping again. Months later, she admitted she still watched staff members' faces whenever she told them something frightening. She was always checking whether they believed her. I apologized once. Really apologized. I should have listened sooner. Claire looked at me for a long time. "You thought I was sick. You were sick." I know. That was the part that stayed with me. Martin never needed to choose people nobody loved. He only needed to choose people whose fear already had a diagnosis. I used to believe safety meant locked doors, trained staff, medication charts, cameras in hallways. Now I think it begins somewhere much simpler. When a frightened person tells you something is wrong, you listen before deciding what their fear is allowed to mean. At 17, I was the student teachers loved because I made their jobs easy. I arrived early, handed work in on time, and kept university brochures taped above my desk. Mom worked at a pharmacy, Dad drove delivery vans, and neither had gone to university, so my applications became a family project. Dad checked train fares to campuses. Mom saved prospectuses in a kitchen drawer. Mr. Armitage taught English literature. He was funny, sharp, and good at making nervous students feel intelligent. He stayed late to help with personal statements and remembered small details from weeks earlier. One afternoon, he held back my essay after class. "You write like someone much older," he said. I laughed awkwardly. He studied me for a second. "That can be lonely." It landed harder than praise. I had spent years feeling older than my friends, too serious, too focused. He made it sound like he had noticed something nobody else had. A week later, a novel appeared on my desk with my name inside the cover. "For you," he said. I took it home. For reasons I couldn't explain, I never told my parents where it came from. The book became part of a routine that looked harmless from the outside. After class, Mr. Armitage asked what I was reading, which universities I wanted, whether people my age ever exhausted me. He never told me to drop my friends. He only said things like, "You'll outgrow some people. That happens." 10-minute conversations became half an hour. He marked extra drafts and sent long comments through the school system late at night. Nothing romantic, nothing explicit. That was what made it hard to call wrong. One rainy Thursday, he offered me a ride home. "I'm heading that way anyway." I hesitated. He smiled. "You can say no." So I said yes, partly because he had made it feel like my decision. His car smelled like coffee and wet wool. He asked about Mom and Dad, whether they understood how competitive university would be. I defended them, then complained about them. He listened without interrupting. Before I got out, he said, "You don't have to make yourself smaller so other people feel comfortable." I carried that sentence around for days. By December, I was telling him things I had never told my closest friend, and every time, I believed I had chosen to. The night I found the folder, I had stayed late helping with a school theater rehearsal. We finished after 8. Rain glazed the parking lot, and the corridors smelled of floor cleaner and dust. Halfway to the bus stop, I realized my notebook was still in Mr. Armitage's classroom. His light was on when I went back, but the room was empty. My notebook sat beside his computer. Next to it was a beige folder, with my full name across the tab. I opened it expecting university paperwork. The first pages were ordinary. Essays, personal statements, copies of messages I had sent through the school portal. Then came photographs from school events. Me at awards night. Me near the library. Me laughing with friends at a fundraiser. Nothing indecent. Nothing I could point to and call a crime. The last page was handwritten. Possible outcomes. One line described me leaving Leeds. Another read. Family tension increases. Reduced contact. Below that, trust becomes exclusive. And under it, in smaller writing, dependency likely if reinforced carefully. My fingers went numb around the paper. Then footsteps entered the corridor and started coming toward the classroom. I slipped behind a storage cabinet packed with costumes and old papers, pressing the folder against my chest. Mr. Armitage entered with Sophie Mercer from my class. Sophie was quiet, brilliant at history, and had recently started eating lunch alone. "I'm sorry it's so late," she said. "Don't apologize. You work harder than most people here." The softness in his voice made my stomach tighten. Sophie said her mother thought she was putting too much pressure on herself. Mr. Armitage gave a laugh. Parents get frightened when their children become people they can't fully understand. I had heard almost the same sentence from him. Then he said, "You're exceptional, Sophie. That can be isolating." Something inside me dropped. Exceptional was my word. I had built months of trust around it. He kept talking gently, asking questions, making her feel seen. Nothing sounded openly dangerous. That was the worst part. I knew. I wasn't special. I was selected. After they left, I photographed every page, returned the folder where it had been, grabbed my notebook, and walked into the rain. At home, Mum saw my shaking hands. "Everything okay?" "Just cold," I said. I stayed awake until 3, staring at the photographs on my phone. Then, I made a new email account. I sent the images to the head teacher, the local safeguarding office, and parents whose addresses were listed on school committee pages. I didn't accuse him of a crime. I wrote, "Please ask why a teacher is documenting students this way." By Monday, Mr. Armitage was absent. A deputy head called it a temporary staffing change. Students whispered different versions all day. Suspension, illness, complaint. Nobody knew. A week later, we were told he had resigned because of stress. I never learned what investigators proved. The folder didn't show an assault. It showed something quieter: patience, boundary testing, and a plan for making a teenager dependent on him. Years later, I searched his name online. I found a tutoring profile in another town. Slightly different name. Same face. I stared until my screen dimmed. What scares me now isn't that he fooled me. I was 17. It's how ordinary he looked while doing it. People like him don't always need locked doors. Sometimes they only need a quiet room and a young person who desperately wants to feel understood.